The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Blessed Valentine's Day to you. Faith Without Borders here. I'm your host, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. So glad that you're able to join us as we seek to provide, this opportunity for us to continue our conversations. This is a progressive and a prophetic platform where we seek to bring together thought leaders as we engage in, a thought-provoking conversation and solutions-driven dialogue around the critical issues facing us, here in the United States and indeed around the world. But for me, born and raised in South Africa, I work very hard to pay closest attention to what's happening on that southern tip of Africa. It's a way for me to connect where I live with where I'm from. That is, I live in Southern California, South Los Angeles, and I'm from Southern Africa, or particularly South Johannesburg. There we go. And it's always great for me to connect faith with medicine and with science. And one of the persons that enabled me to do that on a transnational basis, is Dr. Mary Augusta Adam, who is a physician at the Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto on the south side of Johannesburg. A childhood friend of mine, colleague, and partner as we seek to facilitate health equity, in South Africa, in the United States, and indeed around the world. Dr. Mary Augusta Adam, are you there? Good evening, and welcome.
Good evening from South Africa, the South Side.
There we go. All right now.
I always want to just bring it home for you, to make it feel like home.
That's where we hang. That's where we be hanging. South and South together.
Yes.
And blessed Valentine's Day to you. And so glad that you were able to join us. I know you had a full day at work today, and glad that you're joining us for this conversation. As I mentioned before, we work very hard to build a bridge between faith, medicine, and science, to show that these three can bridge each other. They don't have to be enemies to each other. And you certainly help me to do that. And you do that in such a powerful way, for our audience and for those who seek to facilitate health and wellness, from a faith perspective. So glad that you are able to join us. I wanted to have you on because there's so many changes going around, in terms of the impact of COVID-19. Of course, here in the U.S. as well, we have a new administration now, and so things are getting back on track and being aligned. And then, of course, some changes in South Africa as well. We are dealing with a new variant. We are dealing with vaccinations, not working that got to South Africa, and there was an expiration date, and President Ramaphosa called the Prime Minister in India, and whatever. So much stuff out there, as you know. But for the facts and the truth, I turn to you. So you can break it down for us, and just let us know what's actually going on. First and foremost, how are things, in South Africa, and then you can maybe tell us a little bit about this new South African variant that is making its way around the world right now.
Greetings to yourself, Rev. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to be back with you. As you can see, I've got some pepper in my hair through this COVID experience. But they say these lines are wisdom, so let's pray that I do have that, as this time has provided so much information. And then just happy Valentine's Day to everybody as well. I think I missed the memo. Hey, I went completely opposite, and I love, but I just don't know what happened in terms of the dress code. And then condolences to the body of Christ in the loss of a man of valor and a great man indeed. Reverend Price. So I was listening in on the first session, and what a profound statements he had made, what a life he lived, and what a legacy he lived. And I pray that for his family, for the community that he served, particularly those through his food programs. I wouldn't even say that it's a food program, because what it sounds like is that he really gave from the heart, as this was part of his family.
Absolutely.
And then also to Dr. or Reverend Dr. Thomas, just for that insightful conversation that y'all just had about what's happened in the recent weeks. Certainly, everybody's mind and conversation has been going on about what's been going on in the United States, as well as what's been going on in South Africa. And all that we want to do, whether you in politics or in health, is to make sure that the right message gets across, the truth gets across, and that everybody gets to be part of the transformation that happens. And that's what we want. We don't want to spread rumors. We don't want to spread lies. We want the truth to come across. And as you said, we in this partnership, where we want to create a platform and an equal playing field where we can discuss health and faith in the same room, and have the conversations on how to actually bridge the gaps, so that we can use this platform as a platform of education, teaching, and resolving some issues. And how can we best do that? And is to have these conversations. And I thank you, Reverend Kelvin, for giving us this platform to express the truth and try to clarify some myths surrounding what faith is saying and what health is saying, and try to put them on the same table. And then, just as you had mentioned, you had spoken about how we're doing South Africa. Let me tell you, we are trying to rebuild, especially in these last weeks, in terms of rebuilding the faith in what we've not faith as in church faith or ministry faith, but really the faith in healthcare, in science, with regards to COVID-19, with regards to the vaccines, because it's essential to do that when you want a buy-in from a community. And so, although we are all faced in the world with regards to COVID-19 in this pandemic, but one thing that you can see, that individual countries are facing different faces to how they should deal with it. And we're trying to build confidence in our people once again with dealing with COVID-19 and as well with regards to the vaccines. Yes, in December 2020, it was announced that the COVID-19 that we had all known throughout the globe or the world was COVID-19. And then in South Africa, it was announced that we had a mutation of the COVID-19, and that came through the COVID 501 V2, which is the V2 for the variant, and just the name is in that of 501. But at the same time, also the United Kingdom had also announced that they had also had a new, new variant, and they were facing the same challenges. And this is also just as a reflection on how science has come so far, is that at the same time where you have what they would say a third world country, and where you have a first world country announcing that, through genomic testing, that we could identify this variant. And we in South Africa had identified it through our national laboratories, and again, a partnership between private and public to identify, as these testing swabs were being done, they were monitoring what is this virus doing. And that's how we came about knowing about the new variant that we have in South Africa. And so we can commend and compliment. They wanted to come out at the same time. We want to commend and compliment, our genomics team, not only starting at the end of looking at what is happening with this virus as it's continually to develop across the world, but as these test swabs were coming in from March, they'd been already, February, March, they'd been already starting looking at how is this virus mutating. And this is basically what happens in science when there's a new virus and a new bacteria. You want to see if there are variations as it's going throughout the communities, because they are bound to change. And the reason they do that, the reason they become variants in itself, is because it wants to survive. Mm-hmm. And it wants to be the fittest of us, of the survivors. Mm-hmm. So that's why it wants to do that. And so that's what makes now coming into the discussion vaccines an important one, and especially when we're looking at this COVID that has reached the world. So we need to now understand how are we going to target this, and actually, and that's what dictates genomics as well as the vaccines moving forward.
Wow, I tell you, that was a whole. I've tried to keep up with all the new words you're giving me over there, but I'll have to watch this show again so I can go a little slow, put it on slow motion. But let me.
I know I talk fast sometimes. Yeah, I'm trying to slow it down.
Thanks for that. That was just very, very helpful and insightful for us. Really wonderful to hear that the public-private partnership. I think that's very, very important for us. Tell us about, what's the relationship between, mutation and replication, and what role can the vaccine play in kind of, challenging, that, can you just kind of help us just understand that, a little bit?
Yes, so there are two different terms in science. And replication is just how the virus gets into the body, into the cells, and then how it actually then finds its way to then multiply in a way. Replication, if I can put it in a way that's easier to understand, it's a multiplication in the host. And that causes one then or allows for the virus itself to actually then continue to survive within the host. And then not only that, but as it leaves the cell, it then allows for it actually then to be transmissible. So that's what, again, allows it to be to survive. So replication, one could almost put it together as multiplication. So it gets into the host cell, uses this the host cell's DNA, RNA, and then replicates within the cell, and then goes out of the cell into the cell itself, and then all that genetic material within the cell that actually then comes together, it goes towards the cell wall, and that cell wall creates another cell wall, and it bursts out into the tissue that is most favorable. For example, with COVID-19, that would be the lung tissue, and for those who are more science inclined, those are the type 2 pneumocytes within the lungs. So there's other cells in the body that actually also would be able to do this replication, and this looks at the ACE2 inhibitors with ACE2 receptors within the body. But with COVID-19, to be specific, the target organ is particularly the lung. Now, when we come to mutation, that's where you have in the cells, in the replication process, there's actually a default that happens, or change within its structure, in the DNA, in the RNA structure, and that then actually leads to a mutation. And then when we're talking about vaccines, so when we initially see what the virus looks like, it has a particular pattern, and so that pattern is what we then use to actually create the vaccine. Now, when we look at the mutation, then we have to now look, does this vaccine actually mimic the same pattern? So yes, vaccines, there are different ways of making vaccines. Either you can make a vaccine from the virus itself, but a deadened part of the virus, or you can genetically make a part of the virus so that it mimics the virus. And then, so those are the the types that one can look at. In the COVID-19, we actually have three sort of types of structures that one can look at, which is the viral vector. So it's where you actually have a harmless part of the virus, it's genetically made, or an mRNA, so that's a messenger RNA of the virus. And then that one is where the RNA itself instructs our cells, now the host cell, to actually now produce antibodies towards the virus. And then you get what we call the inactivated, as I mentioned, a sort of like a attenuated, or what some would actually call a dead particles of the virus, if I can put it in simplest forms. And so that's how so we make it according to the pattern of the virus. So if it mutates, then the pattern has changed slightly, and therefore the vaccine has to accommodate for that change. I don't know if that's clear enough.
Right. Yeah. No, that actually makes sense, which really, underscores the importance of being vaccinated. That vaccination has got absolutely nothing to do, with what the Bible says or what your faith says. It is factual and scientific around how to strengthen the body or to arm the body, right, to fight both mutation, manipulation, replication, of COVID-19. I think that's very, very important to establish, and that's why I wanted to ask that question, around it. Now we know
to that when you're talking.
Go ahead.
Sorry, when you're talking about that, vaccines, yes, the aim is to look at different sites that one can actually hinder or stop the virus. So you can get at different points. And particularly with the COVID-19, you're looking at the entry points. So on the COVID, it has spike proteins.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those spike proteins bind to the cell, the host cell. So you want to see if you can use a medication or a vaccine that can actually inhibit at certain points. And so that's where it comes to replication, because you want to actually stop it at certain points. So then that's what science does. It sees at what point will we effectively stop a particular virus from actually getting into the cell to replicate. And then if we can stop replication, then that means we can also in part stop mutating. And how the aim of actually stopping mutating is, like particularly with COVID, you can see that there are clear guidelines to say, if we stick to the non-pharmaceutical interventions, which is hand washing, social distancing, wearing masks, that is an initial part to actually stop mutations. Why do I say that? That is because the more the virus gets to move from person to person, what does it want to do? It wants to survive, because everybody has each host has an immune system that can help stop the virus in that particular host. But in some individuals, they don't have the capacity, the immune system doesn't have the capacity to do that. So then it allows for it to move from one person to the other in variant forms, whether the person is asymptomatic, mild symptoms, moderate symptoms, or severe symptoms. If they're passing the virus will want to survive. And so the more it moves, the more it will mutate. And that's why we need the vaccine in order to try and stop it as quickly as possible from moving from one host to another, so that it doesn't replicate.
Right. So really the virus has nothing to do with the Antichrist. The virus has nothing to do with, any of that stuff. So we just have to make it clear,
Yes.
to folk. Let's check in on the fact that South Africa did order some AstraZeneca, vaccines, I believe, as part of the COVAX program, and then we realized that certainly is not going to be effective, given this new variant. And now South Africa, I believe, has switched to the Johnson & Johnson, one that still needs approval, from the FDA. But of course, South Africa has its own process of approval, as an autonomous country. We don't need to necessarily depend on the FDA, for it, even though there's a lot of collaboration going on between all of these, transnational bodies. So tell us a little bit about where we are with that. And then we know that healthcare workers will be first, and then our elderly, I believe, and I believe that teachers and law enforcement will be part of that because of the possible opening of schools and all that. But tell us just a little bit about, what's going on around, the AstraZeneca piece and that being ineffective, and now moving to Johnson & Johnson.
Yes. As we had spoken about last year, we had mentioned that South Africa is part of the COVAX facility, and this is as you have mentioned, it's a multi-collaboration. And the trans-Atlantic, trans-international collaboration between multiple countries. And the aim is there to stop COVID in its tracks. And the one way to do that is to sit at one table. And so we're part of that table as well. And as other countries were also procuring vaccines, South Africa was also part of that. And you know that much was already discussed between November and December with regards to the vaccines. And so much had gone out and in terms of what was not and what is and what isn't. But where we are at the moment is, yes, we did manage to get AstraZeneca from the India Serum Institute. And that was to be rolled out on the 10th of January, because it arrived on the 1st of January and was supposed to be rolled out on the 10th. So there was nationwide education and information sharing. And then particularly in terms of how it was going to be implemented, there are 3 phases. So it starts with your frontline workers that are firstly the healthcare workers that would include the cleaners, porters, and those in service. Then our second line is those who are in close contact or in close environments that, for example, our prisons. So that would include also our prison workers and our teachers. So the teachers fall in between phase 1 and phase 2 as well, because they are opening soon, actually this week. And then our phase 3 is continued vaccination. And so also the plan in terms of the budget and how this would be implemented, again, using public and private interventions and funding in order for us to do that. Yes, when the vaccines had arrived, it was checked and, it met all the requirements. And as you've mentioned with the FDA, that's the American Federation that approves drugs. And yes, they are the oversight in a sense of what vaccines and medications globally in terms of their processing and the rest. But when it comes to South Africa, we also have, and all countries actually have their own regulatory bodies that supervise and ensure that drugs and vaccines and so forth are actually in keeping and in line and meet the pillars of safety, equity, and quality, basically for the community that it wants to provide for. And then when they did arrive, it takes about 2 weeks for that process also to, as I mentioned, from the 1st to the 10th, and then would actually, in its truest form, run out from the 15th. But what was noticed is that firstly is that we had already discovered the new variant. And so research was done in terms, would this be actually efficient in halting the new variant? And secondly was in terms of the expiry date. And so the expiry date on the vaccines is actually on the 8th of May. And that would, sorry, no, it's not the 8th of May, it's on the 13th of April. So what happens with this AstraZeneca is that, yes, it was available to us, but unfortunately it's a 2-dose vaccine. And so what happens is that we would have got it on the 15th, then we'd have to take our next dose in 12 weeks. But the 12th week cutoff would be in May. So that would mean that the vaccine would have been expired. And so that's why they had to relook at that situation. The second part of it was that to show that in a trial that was done also in South Africa, that yes, it was not effective in mild and moderate disease, including hospitalization of patients. So the efficacy there was a concern. And so that's why they had to halt the rollout and then continue with its task of actually getting another virus. And surprisingly, when we shouldn't actually say get another vaccine. Sorry, I said virus. Get another vaccine. We must understand that Johnson & Johnson have actually been in the forefront of doing, when they were looking at vaccines and implementation of vaccines. It was actually in South Africa that we were also part of the court in terms of the studies, international studies that were happening. So we got the privilege of actually, or Johnson & Johnson got the privilege of doing the tests on both the COVID-19 and the new variant. And therefore, in the phase 2A part of it, because there's different phases to the vaccine trials and studies, found that yes, it is there's some efficacy to cover for that, because our main aim is to make sure that we protect and stop the COVID-19 in its tracks, both what we had known as the strain globally and the one that we're currently facing now, which is the 501 V2.
Absolutely. That's very, very helpful for us. We want to close out by just checking in on the fact that vaccination is just going to be so critical. And of course, there is talk about the fact that we may have to take this now annually, just like the flu shot, or not, as they continue to do research on its efficacy. And of course, as the virus, mutates, and looking for, different ways to attach itself, to our cells. But one thing is clear, that this certainly is a national security threat, and we are very, very concerned about the fact that the UN Security Council, hasn't had any meeting, around this. We know this is health related, and of course it falls under the purview of the World Health Organization, but because it has just shut down, economies, and therefore increased, the lack of security, but also, how it has left so many countries vulnerable as a result of this. Certainly, the silence of the Security Council of the United Nations is quite disturbing, if not appalling. And so we would want to hope that at some point, there would be, some word from them around, how to, look at it from a security, perspective. Also, we cannot vaccinate the global north, without also vaccinating or making sure that the global south gets vaccinated, because this, virus is airborne, and I mean, it reached the South African variant reached the United States without anybody having traveled, to, South Africa around that. So this virus is not a respecter of borders around that. So in closing, just give us a sense about how can we think about, this ongoing global collaboration, whereas each country, because of its ability, takes care of its people, while on the other hand, because of the inability of certain countries, like for instance in Tanzania, they are doing this thing called, a kabisa, that looks like a sweat lodge, where they have people in there, and smoke gets pumped in there. I guess they try to clean people's lungs. I believe there are practices like that in the Caribbean and just elsewhere, where people are just trying to figure out, ways, to deal with this. But that, of course, leaves people even more vulnerable, because even though Tanzania talked about we don't have, we are COVID free, but now, of course, we are realizing that people have been dying, around that. So how do we just look at a global, way, a global strategy around making sure that people are safe and secure as we deal with this, challenge of, mutation and replication, of the virus?
So that's quite an in-depth sort of like, proposal to sort of ask for. And, and yes, indeed, we need to, again, sit at the table and say, what are you facing in your country? But the first thing that one has to do is not only as a country, but as an individual, because it takes us as individuals to make up a community. And if you as an individual realize that this can affect you, and then thus can affect the next person. So one, we have to wake up to the reality, even though we're 1 year in, that this is real. So one, take note that COVID is here. COVID is not going to go away unless we do it together. We work together to save each other from this. Number two, from a global perspective, when you hear about COVID, when you see COVID on the news or anything regarding COVID, take it to heart, because that's some valuable information. And yes, some of the time we often giving you the negative with regards to COVID, because it's not that we want to scare you, but we want to give you enough information to make informed decisions. So again, this comes down to the individual to say, let's take the information, don't switch the channel, don't change the channel to better music or anything like that. But keep yourself informed as to what is happening. Yes, in 2019 into 2020, it was a new variant. And yes, indeed, it's still very new to us as to what we should do. But we've now got guidelines, protocols in place that can help us, whether it's global or whether that's national. These help us to sort of streamline and get ahead of it. COVID always seems to be 2-3 steps ahead of us. But if we keep ourselves informed and keep ourselves up to date with what's happening, then we can keep this together. Number 3 is the fact that there is a community of scientists that are looking at this more intensely and more purposefully to come up with answers to the questions that we ask on a day-to-day basis. And this community of scientists are not only looking at vaccines. No, they're looking at diagnostics. That means testing facilities, tests that can be produced, that can make it more efficient for us to test quickly, diagnose, and then treat. That comes to the second pillar, which is treatment. So one is to identify what's one's symptoms, whether you asymptomatic, symptomatic, and also if you've come into contact or the community has come into contact with somebody with COVID, COVID positive or COVID symptoms. And then in order to identify and treat, and us as the science and health fraternity, to ensure that we treat adequately our patients and our communities. So that is, again, the discussion at the scientist level, is that what we're doing is we're trying to see what is available currently on the market and what do we need to guide and direct our pharmaceutical companies in order to bring forth new drugs that can help us. Because as you know, that with the drugs that we're currently using, it's a variety of drugs that we have understanding with that can possibly help, but we again sitting at the table to bring this to fruition. The next thing with regards to that is the vaccine. Can you see it's the third pillar? And this is again bringing in us as the community, us as the health and faith organizations to say this is what it is, this is why it has been produced in the fashion that it has, and this is only because through collaborations that it actually has come forth. The next pillar would be to look at health systems and making sure that our health facilities are up to the standard and the capabilities to manage patients with COVID-19. But not only that, but to also continue to be a pillar of health to our communities with other disease profiles, so that when they do present, that we're able to not only just hold up COVID-19 and then, the community again loses faith and says that we're only treating COVID-19 patients. But that's not the truth again. The truth is that we're serving our community to the best of our ability. So how can we direct our thinking and our foresight is on these 4 pillars to ensure that we've got good diagnostics, to continue to test and to get results so that we can then treat and make sure that treatments are available for in the form of pharmacological and non-pharmacological. The third thing is to make sure that the vaccines are safe, and we continue to promote that we continue to vaccinate, whether, like you had mentioned now, in terms of vaccinating annually. So we might need boosters, which is true. You see it with other viruses that we've had over the past. And the last one is to make sure that our health systems are in place to manage and continue to provide a service for our people.
Absolutely. Dr. Mary Augusta Adam, my goodness. Every time we talk, I feel smarter. I should try and apply and get another degree after I talk with you every time, because all I got to do is just submit our interview and say, hey, look at what I did. Oh, no.
But you made
Look,
after this talk that we had, I think I want to do law now. Oh my gosh.
or it's me saying, hey, look at what we did, huh? Right? It's not.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Certainly, I mean, what you are telling us, and the reason why, I started Faith Without Borders, is, part of that is, of course, looking at the importance, of the interrelatedness, of life, around that. And so part of it, is, to connect with that Ubuntu piece, right? And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. connects with that Ubuntu piece, I believe, when he writes, while incarcerated, by a white supremacist, a city and state, and of course country, in Birmingham, Alabama, he writes, from that jail a letter. And in that letter, he picks up on, what Ubuntu and mutuality is all about when he writes, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All of us are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And that's why, we cannot just, vaccinate and create an illusion of security for the global north without, taking the responsibility of assisting the global south around, what it needs, to be vaccinated during this particular time. Certainly, COVID has exposed, right, the vulnerability of health systems and the inequities that it has created, in so many communities, cities, and countries. So thank you so much for joining us. So glad, and sending prayers to you with the work that you're doing on the front lines, and appreciation to all of our frontline and our healthcare workers, in South Africa, in the United States. You all have just done an extraordinary, job, and we want to remind people, to make sure, that they practice the 3 W's. That is, wash your hands, wear your mask, and watch your distance. And pretty soon, if you have the opportunity, make sure that you access the vaccine, as part of, another tool in our arsenal for fighting, COVID-19. Thanks so much, Sister Doc. Appreciate you, and sending blessings to you and everyone at home. Thank you so much. All right, that's Faith Without Borders, y'all. We'll see y'all pretty soon, probably in about 2 weeks or so, when we will continue, to elevate this platform as we continue to engage in thought-provoking and solutions-driven conversation. I'm your host, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. Be blessed, be safe, and be well.